My name is John, a young man who just moved out of his parents' house at the age of 20. In search of a lower cost of living, I decided to move to the small town of Vanderbilt Bay in southwest Michigan. It's one of those American towns you see in movies. Spaced out houses all built similarly. Most of the residents are elderly, making it very quiet for most of the year. No noisy parties, speeding cars, or anything like that, which I particularly love. However, shortly after moving, I noticed something strange. My neighbor, Mr. Anderson, has the peculiar habit of lighting a candle every night, religiously at 11:50 p.m., and placing it in his window. He stands there for about 15 minutes, gazing at it, and then goes to sleep. On nights of strong wind or rain, he tends to shield it with something similar to a lantern. I really wanted to know what that was all about. Was it a superstition? A local tradition, ancient enough for only the oldest of elders to remember? I didn't even know how to ask him about it. I briefly mentioned it to an elderly woman, Mrs. Percy, a very kind neighbor who would often show up at my door with sweets and cakes. When I asked, however, she simply changed the subject, and this happened more than once. One day, I gathered the courage to approach Mr. Anderson directly. I walked up to his door, nervous, and knocked. He opened it with a friendly smile, and I, hesitatingly, started asking about the candle. He listened to my question, and for a moment, his eyes seemed distant, as if recalling something. Then he simply said, "It's just a family tradition. Nothing for you to worry about, young man." Unsatisfied with the vague answer, I tried to insist for more details, but he politely closed the door, saying he preferred to keep family traditions a secret. I was frustrated, but my curiosity only grew. I decided to search for information at a small cultural center in town, hoping to find some record that explained the tradition or someone who could shed light on it. However, my effort was in vain. The files were scarce, and the few available details about Vanderbilt Bay didn't mention anything about lighting candles. I tried talking to the officials who handled the center, but they acted similarly to Mrs. Percy. Gradually, all this denial of information became an obsession for me. I waited all night by the window, just waiting for the moment when he would light the candle. On a holiday eve, I even stayed up all night to see if the candles would go out or when he would remove it. He removed it at exactly 5:55 a.m. I was running out of ideas. For a while, I even kept an eye on the neighbors' houses, watching if they would do the same. For some reason, only Mr. Anderson had this habit. With few options left, I went for my emergency plan. On that day, exactly at 11:50, I placed a candle in my window and lit it. It had been an intense workday, and I really needed to sleep, but I couldn't now. I sat in an uncomfortable chair in my room, facing the candle to avoid falling asleep. It didn't work so well because, slowly, Orpheus called me with his sweet song, leading me into Hypno's arms. I was relaxed, unconscious, when I heard a noise that made me jump from my chair. It was knocks, something hitting against the wood of my door. I looked through the window and saw Mr. Anderson at my doorstep. He knocked one more time. "I need to come in," he shouted. "Let me in." I rushed down the stairs, still confused with everything. I approached the door as the pleas intensified, but when I reached the door, about to grab the handle, something triggered my instinct. I felt there was something wrong, and I decided to check before opening. I approached the peephole, staring at the one who disturbed my sleep. He was there, the family neighbor, but different. His mouth was open at an unconventional angle. The voice didn't come from his lips. It seemed to emanate from the black hole that was his mouth. His eyes darted frantically from side to side, unfocused on anything. From his chin, a thick foam dripped, forming puddles on the floor. His arms, now bleeding and twisted, seemed crushed by the wood, judging by the way they contorted. The blows intensified, almost as if the door was about to come off its hinges. I ran to one of the cabinets and pushed it to block the passage. It went on like this all night until 5:50 a.m. I wondered why no neighbor woke up with all this racket. I saw him through the window, returning home, entering, and exactly at 5:55 a.m., appearing at his window to remove the candle. The rest of the day was a nightmare. I was sleep deprived and had to drink about 5 cups of coffee to make it through the workday. This sleepless night left me like a human wreck. I had to go to work in that state, and the 5th cup of coffee in my hand felt like an illusory comfort as I tried to stay awake. I couldn't help but think about the events of the previous night. The image of Mr. Anderson desperately banging on my door haunted my thoughts with every blink. At the end of the workday, I decided I needed to understand what was going on. I took the way back home, nervous, tense. The town was shrouded in a peculiar silence, and the lights of the houses hummed faintly. The street was deserted, with no signs of life besides me and the small details that made up the landscape, like the occasional passing car or barking dog. As I approached home, I spotted Mr. Anderson in the distance. A wave of terror hit me, and I thought about turning back, avoiding the inevitable encounter. However, something inside me insisted that I needed to face that situation. He was walking slowly towards me, completely normal. His friendly and welcoming smile was back, in contrast to the hole that was his mouth the night before. He waved when our eyes met. The scene was so distinct from the disturbing image of the previous night that I almost questioned my own sanity. "Good afternoon, John," he greeted, as if nothing had happened. "Good afternoon, Mr. Anderson," I replied, trying to keep calm, even though my heart was still racing. I hoped he would mention something about the previous night, but he continued the conversation as if nothing were different. We talked about the weather, the neighborhood, trivial things that made no sense in the face of the terrible experience we shared. I was eager to get inside, passed by him and went in, but before closing the door, I couldn't help but ask, "Mr. Anderson, are you okay?" He frowned, as if trying to remember, but then shrugged. "Oh, the usual, young man. A backache here and there, but nothing major." I didn't know what to think. His answer was so casual, as if I were imagining things. He greeted me, and I saw that there wasn't even a scar, let alone wounds on his hands and arms. Could it have been my imagination? Unfortunately, not. I'm well aware of that now because night after night, he comes to scream at my window, saying he needs to come in, regardless of whether I have a candle lit or not. Believe me, I've tried both solutions with no result. I'm really starting to get used to this. It wouldn't be such a big problem until yesterday. I was setting up the desk to block the door, as always. I had already put the furniture on standby when Mr. Anderson started his nightly noise. I was about to go up to my room, put on my headphones and sleep when I passed by the staircase facing the back door, and then, while my neighbor screamed desperately that he needed to come in, I heard a single knock on the door in front of me. Since I lit a candle in my window, my neighbor asks every night for me to let him in, and now there's something knocking on my back door.